Hey there, everyone. Chris Manning here with my guest, Jackson Frank from Dime, from the Analyst, from Liberty Ballers, and a bunch of other places to talk about the improvements of Jarrett Allen and Darius Garland have made this year. Perhaps we'll talk a little bit about their all-star candidacies as well. Let's dive into all of that. Jackson Frank.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Before we get into today's show, I want to thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Remember, Locked On Cavs is free and available on all platforms. That includes YouTube, where we are just a few subs away from 1,000. Help us get there today. And if you're listening at Apple Podcasts or Spotify or your favorite podcast platform, go to the show notes, click the link, and subscribe right now. But Jackson, buddy, what's up? How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I can't complain. Actually, a pretty nice day here in Portland on Sunday. So, no rain, no wind. It makes for a good day in January here.
Yeah, people just a little behind the baseball stuff. We're recording this on Sunday the 16th, so some stats and things have changed. If anything else has changed by the time you hear this on Wednesday, that is why. I am also it's some actual normal weather in Cleveland now, but I'm heading down to the south. It is because things are weird in the world. I'm going to be potentially impacted by snowstorms flying through Atlanta because that's just where we're at in 2022. Cool, just really cool stuff we have going on as we think about all of this. But Jackson, let's start with Darius Garland because you wrote about him earlier in the year. Another disclosure, we started recording an episode and like your power went out. There was a whole shenanigans. Like we're back to do it. It worked out because you wrote this other really great Jarrett Allen piece for the Analyst. But I want to ask you this: when you look at Darius Garland, what do you, in your opinion, has he most improved on this year, and kind of what do you think that has meant for the Cavs, who are very much in the thick of the top 6 race in the East, and frankly one of the more kind of improved teams this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly, it's the scoring aggression. I think it's really taken off since Colin Sexton went down. Maybe even a little more in terms of just offensive aggression since Ricky Rubio went down. They're kind of different players, of course. Both were important to the Cavs offense, and I think that's often manifested primarily through he's just hunting more threes. The 3-point rate's up, I think, about 10 points this year. Not quite as efficient from three, but that tends to happen because I think last year, especially, and even his rookie year, he was so kind of like looking for the best 3-pointer, and he would pass out of some looks. And this year, he's realized, maybe I miss a couple, but if I take them, it's a good shot. So that's what stood out to me. I think the passing's a little bit sharper, but that was incredible last year as well. I think his assist numbers are up this year, and I think maybe his assist to turnover ratio is up a little bit. But I think that's largely the product of having better players around him. Kevin Love's been better this year. Evan Mobley, obviously, is a very good play finisher around the rim. We know what he can do with Jarrett Allen. I think, so again, a little bit sharper, but that doesn't really stand out much. The passing was something that I really, really liked last year. So to me, it's just being more aggressive, and he's a really, really awesome shooter. He's been a little better around the rim too. Like he's not forcing things as much at the rim this year, and he's playing with more craft too. Like I think fewer of his shots are coming there, but is shooting maybe 5 or 6 points better depending on what database you use for shots around the rim. Everyone has, I think Basketball Reference is 0-3, and then NBA.com is like 0-4 within the restricted area. But regardless, definitely a leap there in terms of efficiency. So whether it's taking more threes or being a little more discretionary around the rim, but better when he gets there, and then also just being an awesome mid-range shooter this year on increased volume all around, scoring wise. That's where I see the biggest leap, and it's especially been prevalent since Colin Sexton went down a couple months ago.
Yeah, the 3-point thing I think is the key to note here because it's 9% above overall according to Clean of the Glass. That takes him from about the 39th percentile among guards to 56th percentile, so he's above the average mark in terms of 3-point rate. And the biggest change has been non-corner threes. So 37% of his shots this year are non-corner threes. That's up from 26% a year ago. And as you alluded to, he's taking 9% fewer shots at the rim, and he's still been more effective. His effective field goal percentage is a little bit up this year. The mid-range, is a little bit, is about the static, and it's really been the 3-point volume where his shots have come in. That's kind of an interesting place because I think there's not all reasons that are him, right? Like I think Jarrett Allen being someone he can just throw a lob to, and it's probably going to be a dunk or a foul attempt for Jarrett Allen is probably a reason why he's maybe not shooting as much of the rim, just because that pass just tends to always be there. And Mobley, I think certainly their chemistry is Like we saw a really nice cut from the corner from Mobley against the Thunder on Saturday, where like that might have been a shot for Garland, but Mobley cuts in from the corner. It's an easy dunk. You just take those easy points. The 3-point rate is just, I think, especially important for this team too, because like this is not a well-spaced team. I love Isaac Okoro, not a plus shooter, may never be a plus shooter. Lamar Stevens is playing really well right now. Never probably going to be a plus shooter. Larry Markkinen is not shooting well at all. Like he's just been cold and he's been pretty up and down. Mobley's not a shooter yet. Allen's not a shooter. Kevin Love's been a good shooter. Jetty Osman's been much better this year. Rondo is not going to be once he plays, and Rubio was shooting well, but like was already kind of coming down back to earth after he had a really, really hot start to the year. Garland, especially with Sexton out, Garland kind of has to do this. I don't really like the Cavs offense is about average. It's like fine. The real identity of this team is their defense. I don't know where this team would be. And like when I think about Garland as like an all-star candidate, when I think about him as someone who deserves like maybe most improved player buzz, if depending on how you criteria that vote, like I just don't know how you take away what the team is without his offensive leap and what he's doing offensively. I don't think like their offense functions unless he's doing this. I don't like, are they like a bottom 5 offense if he's like bad or hurt or out? Like, I don't know, because I don't know who else on this team they can trust to like, not just initiate things in a clean way and an effective way, but like make threes like this and space the floor like this. Like is Kevin, like, do you have to go to Kevin Love like 30 minutes a game? That's clearly not a sustainable thing at this point. Like, I don't know what you would do unless Garland is doing kind of what we're seeing right now. And that's like both, I think, terrifying a little bit, but also like really, really impressive if you're looking at it from a Darius perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw some of what they would have to do in those games that Garland was out. I think the Pacers game early this month when Mobley was running point a lot and stuff like that. And that's something I think Mobley can do at times, like handle the offense, like long term especially. But right now, it's not exactly what you want to do all the time because the jumper's not quite there. Guys can kind of get into his handle and kind of make him uncomfortable. But yeah, I think, with Garland, obviously some of that is circumstantial. The fact that Sexton's out and Rubio's out, like, Garland is more important than because those guys are out. But he's also just really important because he's really, really good, right?
Yes.
And so I think, but just it's really interesting to look at the splits and kind of how he was approaching the game before and after Sexton's injury. Roughly here, about 11 shots per game, those first 8 games that he played, 15 points. Since then, I think 15 or 17 shots, if I just looked at it correctly on Basketball Reference, and 21 points. Still been pretty dang efficient all around, above league average true shooting pretty comfortably, which is impressive, as we mentioned, given the limitations of that roster right now offensively. So really impressive, because that was the thing that, I thought Garland was really, really awesome down the stretch last year. And, after the All-Star break, he had that unfortunate ankle injury that kept him out for a lot of the last month or so. But that was kind of my biggest worry with him offensively was, would he get to a place where he felt like he could be aggressive enough? Because he's always been so wired to make the right plays, always such a great passer. But I kind of worried, could he handle that increased scoring volume if he had to? Could he get to that place where he's not just like a really, solid lead ball handler, but one that is really, really threatening and imposing both as a scorer and passer? And, it's unfortunate how it's come to be that way with injuries to Sexton and Rubio, but he's absolutely kind of done what he can to cover it. He's not a guy that's all of a sudden averaging 15 points and 14 assists, but the offense is more bogged down. He said, okay, I'll take 4 to 5, 6 more shots per game and make it work. So that's been really impressive. It's by no means is like, are those injuries, some people say, oh, it's like a blessing or curse. It's not a blessing, but that those injuries have forced him to kind of grow outside of his comfort zone. And it's been really cool for him. And I think that's the reason you're seeing him as a legitimate all-star candidate. I think if those guys were still around, he'd be a guy like, yeah, he's a good player, really, really good young guard for that context, but probably not quite all-star level. But because of those injuries and what he's had to do as a result, he's absolutely in the all-star conversation.
Yeah, the Sexton part of it is just unfortunate because you could see at the beginning of the year that Sexton was getting moved more off ball and like they were turning some stuff over to Garland. But at the same time, like, Colin would have, I think, provided something this team kind of is missing, just some scoring punch that I think it kind of needs at times. But them and just Colin getting hurt at the time he did is just one of the more unfortunately time injuries I can think of in recent, like just in terms of the Cavs ascending, his fit and all that with his contract. It's just like a real bummer. Before we're going to break, Jackson, I want to just ask you this because I tend to think that Darius also has improved on defense. He's not a plus defender, right? Like there's been games this year where teams will hunt him down. Like Drew Holiday, when they have played the Bucks, has just kind of wrecked him just because Drew Holiday is awesome. But Drew Holiday just used his size, kind of went at Darius. But I think his positioning, I think his effort level have been better this year. Where like, yes, he has these 2 like 7-armed monsters behind him. When he plays with Okoro can handle like the lead kind of ball handler type. So he's not getting put in the pick and roll like hell zone like a ton of times of game necessarily. But I think he's better, and I think that is not something that is ever going to drive his value. That is not going to get him like whatever contract extension he is going to get after the season. But I think he's better. Is that unfair in your mind?
I don't know. I think, I feel like it's been ebbs and flows for him. I thought to start the year he was pretty solid. I don't know how long I would classify the start as. And then there was a little bit of a stretch later in the year when I would catch, a Cavs game, once or twice a week, and I would be pretty unenthused with his defense. But as of late, maybe the last month and a half, I don't feel like it's ever really stuck out. Like Trae Young is a better player than Darius Garland, but when I watch the Hawks, I'm always noticing, if I'm keeping a keen eye, like Trae Young's breakdowns defensively. I don't feel like Garland is that way. And it helps that like the personnel around Garland is much better. The Hawks don't really have much beyond Clint Capella. And then when DeAndre Hunter is available, Kevin Huerter can be okay there. But it definitely helps. And so I think he's been all right. Like Garland isn't like some super strong guy, but he uses his physicality pretty well. Like he moves well laterally. Obviously, you see kind of the burst and the speed offensively, but there are definitely times where he's able to stay in front of his man and uses his chest well, kind of sticks himself out like that to stop drives and whatnot. Always going to be limited because he's a smaller guard. People always classify guards as small, like a smaller guard, but like he's actually a smaller guard. Between his size and I guess his strength and all that, but. I think he's been all right, to put it, concisely. Like it's been up and down, but I feel like he's done some good things off the ball and even on the ball at times. And again, I don't feel like he sticks out like a sore thumb. And as you mentioned, the context helps when he has two all defensive caliber big men around him, and even Lowry has size to kind of deter guys away from him at times. So, and then as you mentioned, Okoro, and then even Lamar Stevens now in the starting lineup is a very good wing defender. So. He's in a good context, but he doesn't derail things. He doesn't kind of crumble possessions, I think is kind of the way I try to frame some of those guys, and that's important, and he has some good traits. So I would say it feels kind of like I was always fairly optimistic about him defensively in terms of not being like bottom barrel, or at least I would say last year too. So feels about the same to me, but again, I'm not watching every game. I love watching the Cavs, but I can only get maybe then every other game at best. So it doesn't feel necessarily much better. Maybe the impact is better, but I always felt like there was the baseline of a guy who could be pretty solid in the right context, and obviously this is the right context for that.
Yeah, some of this truly might just be like me like noticing it more. Like I'm totally willing to like acknowledge that like maybe I am just noticing the fact that he's like not dying on screens anymore. But like that is such like a bar that if you just willing to fight through screens and like stick to what you're supposed to do, and even if you're never gonna like be a all defensive guard guy, like you can be successful if you just do that kind of stuff. Like it's a very low bar sometimes, but like you can. All right, after the break, we're gonna get into a little more of Darius Garland because he's just been incredible, and he's coming off I think one of the most impressive games of his season the Saturday against the Thunder. Just an outrageous performance for him. But first, got to tell everyone about our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks has the best NBA DFS prop game on the market. They offer more NBA props than any other DFS prop operator, and offers all the superstar players as well as bench players, only recording a handful of minutes each game. PrizePicks offers any prop you can think of, from points, assists, rebounds, threes made, etc. You can pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus those projected numbers. Right now, for a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive offer, no brainer of an offer for all users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry score scores just 1 single point. But all you got to do is use the promo code NBA. That is right. That is an exclusive offer available to Locked On listeners only who use the code NBA. Go to prizepicks.com or on your app store and download the app. All you have to do is deposit and use the promo code NBA to get $50 free dollars in your first PrizePicks entry when someone scores a single point. That's right. All users that deposit and use the promo code NBA will get $50 free if your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. All right, Jackson. So what do you, if you're looking at what Darius has done and where he could still go, I guess I want to ask this as kind of a 2-part question. What are his next steps, and what kind of players that they don't already have would kind of be the ideal fits to support that growth? Like what kind of infrastructure can the Cavs look to add in your mind to kind of support whatever next steps can come for him?
Yeah, I am curious to see where exactly his scoring efficiency levels out, because as good as he's been this year, I think he's shooting unsustainably well from mid-range. Like he's 52, 54%. Like that's I don't know how many guys in NBA history have sustained that over multiple years. KD, Chris Paul, even those are the guys kind of the bellwethers for that, and they're usually 49-50%. So I'm curious to kind of see how his scoring approach evolves when maybe he goes through a cold stretch in a month. I mean, he can have a year where he shoots outlier well from injuries that happens, but long term, I'm curious to kind of see what he does there. I would love to see him. I would be curious because, as you mentioned, I think he doesn't have issue getting to the paint, getting to the rim, but because he has a guy in Jarrett Allen shooting like 80% at the rim this year, and they have such a good connection, like he doesn't feel the need to force a shot at the rim. But I would be curious to kind of see how does he balance that, long term, like where does he kind of find the right level of throwing the lob and whatnot. And again, it helps that Jarrett Allen has a 7'6" wingspan and all that. So for this conduct, you take a lot of shots there, but to me, it's just really about like that. And then also I want to know how he does long-term, against traps and stuff in the playoffs, because as much as I love the Cavs this year, one game I can't shake, and that has me a little bit worried about the playoffs. And it's fine. Like they're young. It's not going to be a bit like that. I think the first Milwaukee game, they played the Bucks twice this year.
The first one was a lot of them trapping Darius and putting him in like prison basically, and Drew Holiday just then like backing him down and like owning him for like the end of that game. I know exactly. Yeah, it's that first Bucks game that they lost in Milwaukee.
The second game it was like a shell of the Bucks. They had a bunch of guys out.
But
I remember watching that first game and it had me a little bit worried about kind of how Garland would fare, against a long-limbed, trap-heavy or aggressive scheme, in the pick and roll there. I think it does help that in games since then a lot. I think the Cavs have been smart to use Evan Mobley as a screener there. Because Evan Mobley is such a good decision maker on the short roll. So if teams are going to trap Garland, he's either going to, Mobley's either going to find, Chetty in the corner for three, or Jarrett for a lob, or cutting Stevens from the baseline, things like that. Or maybe Kevin Love's in the other corner. So we've definitely seen some tweaks to how they go about that, because you can just tell that like the Cavs watch the film from that game and we're kind of like, okay, we got to figure out what to do if teams are going to trap Darius and he's not going to be able to get the ball out quickly. So that would be my other thing, is like, how does he respond, to teams like that are really, really big, and the Bucks are, at their best, arguably the best defense in the NBA. So that's not some, replicable, team building strategy across the league, but for what I think this Cavs core is capable of long term with three, conservatively top 50 guys, 23 and under, that either you should hope that you're going to get to a spot where like Garland runs into that sort of problem, quote unquote, consistently. I shouldn't say problem, but that sort of strategy, I guess. Yeah. And so you've seen some growth against traps, but the Bucks are kind of, the standard right now in terms of like, one of the better trapping teams that has the size and all that. So that's what I'm most curious about. And that's why I'm so excited to watch him in the playoffs. I really want to kind of see how he does. Everyone was curious about Trey last year, and he did really well for the most part. And I think, Garland's kind of that next guy who's a brilliant shooter, scorer, passer, but has a little bit small in the size. And the big difference, though, is I think Trey handles traps better. And that's not to say that Garland can't get there, but that's the biggest thing to me, is how do he and the Cavs respond? And we've seen some encouraging things over the last 5 or 6 weeks since that game, and how much Garland kind of struggled to make an impact at times against that strategy.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see kind of how they build a roster to kind of help do that, because I think if they get to a playoff series right now, I think you've outlined exactly what teams will do. They will trap the Cavs. They will say, we're going to get the ball out of Darius's hands, and we're going to dare anyone else to beat you. We're going to put the ball in Isaac's hands. We're going to put the ball in Mobley's hands, frankly, because like, although you get flashes of it, it can be up and down a little bit because he's so young. And when the Cavs, it drives me nuts when the Cavs will like post him and they just let him dribble the ball like 5 times while everyone else is standing around. It's just bad. It's just bad offense. And teams in the playoffs, like if they get, like, let's say they were to get like Philly in the first round, that is like not like, they're just like, okay, like we'll scram out of this. We'll put Embiid on Mobley for a little bit or something, or he'll play help defense, and like it won't go well, or they'll trap him, or they'll put Thibault on him and just be like, okay, Darius, like you're going to give up the ball, and if you're going to get shots up, it's going to be really hard for you to get anything clean because we're going to have Matisse just chasing you around for like the 35 minutes you're playing or whatever. Like it will be harder.
The Sixers would just put Matisse on him and probably hedge a lot with Embiid, and then have, if Danny Green's healthy, they would have Danny in help, and he's got such great hands that they would rotate to Mobley, on the short roll with Danny, and he would, as I mentioned earlier, Mobley has a pretty good handle for big men, but can still have issues against perimeter players making stuff happen. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's other, you look at Chicago, a team that is, doesn't have the big man inside, but a team at full strength that's really good defensively. I know the numbers
48 minutes of one of Lonzo or Caruso chasing Garland around is like that's a hard play up. That's just hard. That's just really hard.
Absolutely.
And I think you've seen them try to do some stuff in the short term to like work around this. Like when Kevin and him are in the game together, they've been doing a little more of Jarrett Allen will screen for off ball and Darius comes around screens. They try to get him kind of cutting to the rim and as off back cuts off of screens. They're trying to get him stuff where he's not having to just bring up the ball and run a pick and roll. They're trying to get him like coming off the screens and initiating the offense after he comes off the screens just to kind of loosen things up. I think that's why they went out and got Rondo just to like theoretically have another ball handler. Although we've seen like just a very small sample of it, but like I don't expect Rondo plus Garland to have nearly the same magic that Rubio Garland did. It's just going to be very different when it comes down to it. I think like if they decide to make a trade, whether it's now or in the offseason, if they can find, again, like I think like the A+ names you could throw out there as like fan dream targets, like Ingram, Jaylen Brown, that kind of player. I tend to think that if they could find like a middle ground of like some kind of wing who's like an okay shooter but can handle the ball and also is bigger, that is like at least like 6'5", like Karis LeVert is like not a perfect fit, and like his injury history and his shooting is like a little bit of a concern, but like that is the archetype of player that I think if you could find that guy and you could fit that guy into your starting five, and like maybe it's like this is what replaces Markkanen at the 3, or maybe it's a 2 if you want to keep Markkanen at the 3, whatever you want to do, and Okoro will have a big say in what you do there. Like that is the kind of player that I think could really help Garland. I also just frankly think like I don't know what his contract situation look like. There's a version of what Colin Sexton can be in the NBA that is still like an interesting fit as like a supplement to what Darius Garland has become. I don't know if like I want to bank on them as like your starting backcourt going forward, but like if Sexton is like your bench guy to kind of come in, or like you stagger them even if they start together, kind of like are way more aggressive about staggering them, and you're allocating less of the cap than like the Blazers have done with Lillard and McCollum. I think you can find ways around it without having to get like the A+ guy. But like if I'm Kobe Altman, that is concern 1, and with concern 2 being like real depth and shooting over the next like 12 months. Like those are kind of the two things to me that if I'm trying to figure out what to do here to take the next step and not let this be like a 1 year and then regression kind of thing, it's that kind of player that I think you need to take some of the burden off of Darius, because it is just too much in the modern NBA to ask him to have to keep doing this and doing this and doing this. Like it's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable, I think, franchise building.
Yeah, and I think the McCollum, Lillard, and comps weren't ever unreasonable, and I get them now. But I think what differentiates the comp at this point is like look at the Blazers front court over the years, right, versus who the Cavs are going to have for the next half decade at a bare minimum, right, with Mobley and Allen there. So that makes you, because the concerns are always defensively, right? So like you have 2 all defensive caliber big men inside. Like you can make a lot of things work, and you've got Okoro and you've got Stevens, and I don't know what's going to happen with Chetty long term, but he's a guy who I think has been up and down defensively. It makes stuff happen. Like he makes things happen that kind of skew positive at least. So and that's the big bummer about both the Sexton and the Rubio injuries you mentioned with Garland going off the ball, because I thought he was good off the ball last year, but he just didn't get to do it as much because of the roster. This year I think they've featured it more when they can. It's been less prominent since the Rubio injury, unfortunately, but and Garland's gotten a little bit better there too. And so you take a guy like Rondo, who I think was I think I watched all 3 games he was with the Cavs. Was okay. He wasn't great in that Portland game, unfortunately, but was pretty solid in the other 2 games I think at times. But his issues is like, even though he's a very good passer, like he doesn't keep the ball flow going like Rubio does by any means. He doesn't probe like that. He doesn't make the quick decisions. Like he can still kind of wants to be the guy who makes the assist, which is totally fine. Like if you're a guy like Rondo, you would want to trust yourself, but it bogs things down. And he doesn't have the scoring punch of Sexton, right? So like Sexton, even though you didn't trust him as much to necessarily make to timely read as a passer, you could trust him to score pretty well. Rubio, he was the other way around, right? And so Rondo doesn't give you that. So some sort of guy there that you can trust, and I think that would help. But yeah, I think I would lean wing for Cleveland. That aren't they again having 2 7-footers like that inside who are smart off-ball scorers, can finish everything, and are great defensively, gives you a lot of leeway for how you proceed when you have Garland there. But I would lean wing. I just think it would be nice to have a guy that Mobley and Allen, or Mobley or Allen, can run a set of screen for Garland. He can get downhill, and he can get the ball to the lob, or he can kick it out to a corner of the wing for a secondary scorer to either take that spot up 3 or attack off the catch. And, that's why I think, I think Ingram is I don't know exactly, I don't know, Ingram versus Jalen's very different types of players, but
I have a personal preference, but and it's Jalen just because I think Jalen is the defensive stuff with Jalen to me just like so tantalizing because Ingram's been a little more up and down on that end, but like Ingram as like a shot creator who's like also very tall is also just like it would fill a clearer need maybe a little more directly than like Jalen might. But these are also like pipe dream trades. Like these are things that like the odds of them happening are very slim. Like the realistic thing is like something in the middle of like that is not going to be, something that costs you like a bunch of firsts or like one of your other, like it's just real. It just feels more realistic. There's like a middle ground you have to try to wedge there. Like if there's like whoever like the next like TJ Warren type of player is who's just going to like kind of evolve into something a little bit more and then isn't going to cost like $30 million a year when, you have a lot of money coming up for Darius and Jarrett's making $100 million. Like that to me feels more, even though like, I think if the Cavs could, they would probably be like, yeah, like we would, in a perfect world, they'd be like, yeah, we'll also take Brandon Ingram. But like, that's also just pipe dream trade stuff, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah. And I think, I think Ingram's improved defensively this year. And I think Jalen is like, I'm not enthused with Jalen's defense as much, like, especially off the ball. Like,
the Celtics vibes are just so sus that I'm just a little just like, okay, like I just believe.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I think I think the gap defensively is much smaller than maybe reputation or narrative would suggest with them. I think both have some pretty good utility on the ball, but both leave a lot desired in varying ways off the ball. But I think if those are the guys you're looking at, like I think it depends kind of what they want that acquisition to do for Darius. Is it that you want another release valve on the perimeter? Because that's where I think Jalen is a little better. He's quicker with decisions. He's better getting downhill. I trust him a little more to take the spot up 3 rather than dribble into something. Ingram is the guy that instead can move Garland off the ball. You can play Ingram as a guy that you set flex screens for it. Let him work in the mid post. He can still shoot spot up 3s, but he's a little more comfortable in terms of catching the ball and then taking a couple of dribbles. So it kind of depends. Do you want Garland's life to be more beneficial as a passer, or do you want it to be easier as a scorer? So if those are the two guys, which I think both are, I'm not saying that like neither one's available right now as far as but I don't think it's like wild to presume that one or both could be available in the next 7-8 months. It's just saying now, but between now and next year's trade deadline. And so it's just kind of curious if those are kind of the top guys, how each would impact Garland and whatnot. Both of them are going to, put a lot on Mobley and Allen's plate defensively, but given what I've seen from them this year, I have pretty good confidence that they're capable of it. So, but yeah, I think just some sort of scoring punch next to Garland would really help on the perimeter, because I think as good as Jarrett has been and what I think Mobley can be long term, at least from a playoff perspective, which is what I think the Cavs should be emphasizing because they're already really good. Yeah. You have a little bit of worries about offensively limited big men, even if Mobley has gotten better as the year gone on, and Jarrett's already much better than he was last year in terms of kind of making things happen for himself. So both those guys are good options, but anyone really, I think, just with some size there to kind of give some sort of punch from the perimeter to help everyone involved, but particularly Darius would be really, really useful to target in the next 10 months.
Yes. All right. After the break, we're going to talk about the aforementioned Jarrett Allen. But first, going to tell everyone about our friends at Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market with so many great flavors, including cookies and cream, mint brownie, coconut. I mean, you can't really go wrong with any of them. Check out a mix box if you haven't tried any of them already. Most Built Bars have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which has 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Built Bar, by the way, is it's chocolate covered, but it's 100% real chocolate, but they're still healthy. You can't really go wrong. Go to Built.com, promo code LOCK15, and get 15% off your order. Again, use the promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Okay. Jackson, you just wrote about Jarrett Allen. And I think he is very much deserving an All-Star game consideration at the very least. He's been awesome. His post game this year has become something that you can actually like use, and like that is not something that I think was the case last year or during his time in Brooklyn. He's back to shooting really efficiently at the rim, which he had a kind of a dip in last year with Cleveland, where he was just wasn't getting as many shots to the rim, and that has drastically changed this year as things have kind of normalized. I want to ask you, what to you has made him pop? Like, has popped with him, and particularly what has popped in his partnership with Mobley? Because like those two have just become outrageous, and it's worked, I think, better than anyone probably could have expected, in if we're being optimistic about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I had such a blast watching Jarrett Allen this year. He was good last year, and he's been good in Brooklyn as well. But I mean, I watched that first game of the year against the Grizzlies, excuse me, and I literally remember writing like in my notes like possible like self-creation leap from Jarrett Allen. Like, is he a much better player? Like, it just popped from day one that he was a better player than last year, and it's basically been that way all year. What stands out to me is the patience he has on the roll too. Like, obviously when he plays in the dunker spot, or he's playing against traditional drop coverage, he's great because Garland is going to make that read every time, and they have such good chemistry. And Jarrett he knows how to position himself off the ball really well. But when teams trap Darius, or they do other things to get the ball out of his hands and kind of put a defender between Jarrett and the basket, his patience there is really good. He pivots, he's got up fakes. He's so long that he doesn't need to get all the way to the rim. He knows how to use that length too. And I think what I read about in that article is, there are certain, like, a lot of times people will use the term rim runner to kind of imply limitations. And while that's not untrue, there's a broad spectrum of what defines a rim runner. You compare what Jarrett Allen can do on the roll versus what a guy like Daniel Gafford can do. And Daniel Gafford's good. Like, but you put a 6'8" wing between Daniel Gafford and the hoop on the roll, he's probably going to have some issues. He's better as a passer this year, but he is not comfortable putting the ball on the deck. Jarrett can kind of do a little bit, one or two dribbles there, use his length to get around guys. So that's what really kind of stands out there. And then as that patience and those pivots and that footwork extend to the post. He's not Joel, he's not Nikola, he's not Cat in the post. But he has that hook shot down. He's got the nice up and unders. Like, I think when I did like my montage of post ups for Jarrett, I think I had Steven Adams in there twice getting burned on an up and under in different games against the Cavs. But he's just so patient there. And then he's not some incredible passer. He's not Mobley, but like the Cavs can trust him to be a decision maker, and feel like what he's going to do with the ball is going to produce a good result. Whether that means points is obviously not entirely within his control, but that's important. That really kind of distinguishes him, because I think he has a rim running role, but I don't think he's a rim runner in the Cavs offense by any means. I think he has more utility than that, and that's important. But defensively, just the growth on the perimeter, the way that like the Cavs defense is, I would say kind of the foundation of it is the fact that he and Mobley can kind of toggle between roles when they're out there together. And I thought Mobley could kind of do whatever he asked him in pre-draft defensively. I didn't quite think Allen was as kind of malleable or versatile if every team want to use there. And he's been incredible. He holds his own on switches. He flips his hips so well. He's light on his feet. They have him play kind of the nail and stunt on drives at 7 feet tall, which is ridiculous. It's not really I thought Mobley could do that, but the Cavs have no issue. Like, if Mobley is the one protecting the rim inside and Allen's the one playing on the wing defensively, they're totally comfortable with that. If the roles are reversed, they're good there too. So the biggest areas of growth for me, like I said, are kind of the patience as a scorer, both in the post and on the roll, and then the fact that he's a lot more comfortable excelling on the perimeter defensively. And then you couple that with a great synergy with Garland in the pick and roll. You have a really, really good player. But with Mobley specifically, the high-low passing is awesome from both ends, whether it's Mobley finding him for a dunk or vice versa. You just have 2+ passers for a big man in there. And then also they're both smart off-ball scorers too. They move into space well. They play the dunker spot well. Like, sometimes you put a guy in the dunker spot, he doesn't exactly know how to function there. Both Allen and Mobley are really good about kind of figuring out when to peek into the passing window, when to roll. Like, if a guy's probing, like that was the thing that they both had really good chemistry with Rubio. If Rubio he'll drive baseline, he loves to do kind of that probe, keep the ball dribbling and, under the rim, and they'll kind of float into the middle of the paint instead, not clog things up, and Rubio will find them. So just really, really impressed with Jarrett Allen. In a lot of ways, honestly, and people might think this is a disservice to him, but it's not been. In a lot of ways, he's kind of been the Rudy Gobert of the East, and I don't mean that disparaging at all. Like, I mean that genuinely as a compliment. Rudy Gobert is an All-NBA center, because he's been so good defensively too. Like, I had some numbers in my piece, but like I think among guys who can test like 100 shots at the rim this year, he had the best disparity between like what they shoot on average there versus what they were shooting against Jarrett Allen. It was like the top four were like Gobert, Giannis, Jarrett, and Mobley or something like that. which is ridiculous that two guys on the same team are on there. But again, he's finishing like 80% of his shots at the rim, which is like unheard of. Like, I think again, I had some stat on there that like Gobert is like, I think maybe I pulled some data from the Analyst side, so it was a little bit different, but like Jarrett shooting like 76% at the rim and Rudy Gobert shooting a career high 72%. And everyone knows that Rudy can finish everything at the rim basically. So I really can't say enough great things about Jarrett this year in terms of who he's been and the strides he's made to become this player. It's really, really fun and makes it even more exciting to kind of see who he becomes in 3 years, right? Does he turn 24 this year or in the summer? But regardless.
In April.
Okay, so right around there. So regardless, like, usually guys peak in that 26 to 28-year-old range. Jarrett still has a ways to go to kind of reach that range, and so I'm really excited to kind of see what he does because he's gotten wildly better every year. Wildly better since his rookie year, and kind of incremented every year. And I think it's really, really fun and cool. And again, I could go on all day about what he's done this year, and it's been really, really enjoyable.
Yeah, Michael Pina from Sports Illustrated pointed out a couple weeks ago that at one point he would have been, if the season had ended, he would have been like the first player in NBA history to take at least 10 field goals a game and shoot above 70%. He is now like at 9.8 per game, and is shooting 69.4%. So like it's still like within the range of possibility. He's just like dunking on everyone. He's, I think, just like, kind of been propping up the defense when Mobley sits and is, I think like, depending on who you ask and like what you value, I think you could get a very different answer on like who you would say has like the better all-star case in between him and Garland. And I don't like mean to like put them against each other, but I think like you could just argue depending on what you think is really driving this team's success. Mm-hmm. I tend to think that at times he has been the Cavs' best player this year. I think Garland is probably the most important just because of how important ball handling and shot creation and kind of organizing the offense has really been. Even when Rubio was getting his deserved flowers, I thought like Garland had just clearly kind of just taken on a much bigger role in a way that mattered. I kind of think Allen, though, has the best chance of being an all-star for Cleveland just because of like how, if you just think if they're going to give some front court guys some love, and like Embiid's been awesome this year, which you could speak to better than me, but Bam's been out a bunch.
It's a lot thinner. It's a lot thinner in the front court, and you get more. There's more guys who make it in the front court because they give three positions there. So
so it's like DeMar being maybe a kind of as a guard, which you shouldn't, but like it like he's
positions don't even exist anymore.
I mean, which is fine. I'm cool with that. Like, just honestly, like all NBA teams should be like, if I'm gonna radicalize them, like just give me like the best 15 dudes. I don't care.
I said that the other day. Like you have Trae Young leading an elite offense at 6 feet tall, and then you have like Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid running point guard basically at 7 feet tall. And it doesn't like it. What's a point guard anyways? But
it's dumb. But like Allen, I think like if you're looking at who's competing against, I think like Bam's being out, like I think hurts Bam, but I love Bam. Like among like let's just say centers, like it's like Embiid, and then I don't like off the top of my head like. In the East, it's like I don't think like the Celtics guys are better. Like I don't think the Pacers guys have been better. I don't think like Vooch has been better. I don't think like Clint Capella has been as good as Jarrett Allen. Like I think Allen like has a real shot. I think if I was gonna gauge on like if one of them is gonna be all-star, I think Allen might have just a better chance just because guard in the East is so stacked. And Garland I think is very much deserving of consideration. But like if you're going against Van Vliet and Holiday and like the one
Bean
and LaMelo and like the DeRozan counts the guy, like it's just loaded even if he's deserving. I think Allen has like a very clear shot of being an all-star this year, and like that's
I think Allen for me would be like I think he would be my automatic first front court reserve. Obviously, of the big three of. Well, I guess we're gonna get one more guy in because it seems like KD probably will be out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The All-Star game's in a month now, and he's
he's we're going to they announced on Sunday that he has an MCL sprain. Like you would think that just they might not like he'll like be named an All-Star, then it's just like quietly like we're not. You don't need to go play in this game that doesn't matter at all. Yeah. Just rest. It's fine.
But regardless, like the big three of Giannis, Embiid, and KD, the three guys that you consider like MVP candidates, like those they're going to start. It's going to be like nobody or name the starters. Allen would be my first front court, reserve. I think Tatum's deserving as well, despite having a down scoring year so far. I've been impressed with him, but I would pick Allen before Tatum so far. I think it's close because they're in very different contexts. One is very favorable for Jarrett Allen, the other not so much for Jason Tatum, unfortunately. But and then you mean like Jimmy Butler's been awesome, but Jimmy has missed 20 won games. I would put him in because it's been a wonky year and I want to reward the best guys, but I wouldn't put him in above Jarrett by any means.
Yeah.
And I think that the coaches, that stuff matters too. Like the fact you can, Jimmy's awesome, but it matters that you've only played 21, you missed 21 games and he'd have played 45 total. Like that sort of stuff is important. So I agree that the depth of guard hurts Garland a little more, unfortunately, but I think Garland could still get in. Like I think there's a bunch of different, like to me, I feel pretty strongly that Trey should start. But other than that, like I don't really have an issue in terms of like I could hear a case for like 6 or 7 different guards that you should say starts alongside Trey this year. And Garland is one of them. I think Garland's case is less strong than maybe a couple other guys for me, but I think he's absolutely got a chance for sure. And yeah, I think as you mentioned there, kind of the start of the segment is interesting. Kind of how you craft their case. Do you each of these two guys' case? Do you say that like the Cavs are an elite defense, and Jarrett is arguably the most important reason for that, and he pairs very well with Garland pick and roll, or is it that allows Garland to survive defensively, or is it that Garland is so good offensively at generating shots for Mobley and Allen and creating for himself that he allows the offense to stay afloat, and that's why they can play all these defensive slant players. So I think that's a really interesting discussion. I lean more toward preferring the defense there. But I don't think you can go wrong. And I think, as we said, like if it was just the best 12 players in the conference, in a given season or a given, 60% of the year, I think either one would be of pretty similar cases in terms of, just like flat deservingness, obviously different cases in terms of how they flesh it out. But just because of the landscape, it seems like Jarrett is a better case, but by no means. I mean, the Cavs have a pretty nice schedule between now and the time All-Star reserves are picked, if I recall. Mm-hmm. And so, the Cavs could rattle off, get up to 3rd, 4th in the East. And, I don't always agree with it, but sometimes voters or coaches, I guess, like to kind of reward team success. I think it's, to me, I shouldn't say I don't disagree with it, but I think you have to have a better reason than just, this team is, 3rd in the East. Well, that's why they should have 2 All-Stars. But that stuff does matter. And I think, if the Cavs continue to rattle off wins, it will be because of Garland and Allen and, Mobley to a lesser extent, but he's not in the All-Star discussions this year, at least.
Yeah. Just as an run of voting, Garland is 9th in the last return of votings behind the likes of Van Vliet, Derrick Rose, and Kyrie. And who knows how the Kyrie thing will be viewed among coaches. That is just, I don't want to touch that. And Allen is 6th behind, kind of in his own little tier, behind Jimmy Butler, but ahead of Bam, ahead of Pascal Siakam, ahead of Miles Bridges, and ahead of LaMarcus Aldridge, who's 10th. And so I think certainly won't be an All-Star in the way that like Derrick Rose won't be an All-Star, but his top 10 in voting. Fan voting is very funny, and I understand it. It's very funny. I also just think 15-man rosters. I think I did that backwards, but
12. Yeah. It's 12, isn't it? Isn't it 12?
Yeah, but I want 15. I'm gonna.
Yes. I agree.
I had it backwards because I wasn't thinking on video.
I agree though. Yeah,
I want 15.
Hasn't it been 12 since like the league had like 20 teams? It's weird. It doesn't make sense to me either.
Video. All right, Jackson. Before we go, I'm gonna just direct people to go check out your work at the Analyst. There's your piece on Jarrett Allen. There's your piece on Darius Garland, which is a little older, but still very much worth people's time. Just tell everyone about what you're doing and where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at JackFrank_JJF. I'm tweeting a lot of clips and thoughts about different teams. The Cavs are among my most prevalent talked about teams this year because I was high on them, coming into the year, and I've watched a ton of them and enjoyed them. And then as Chris said, you can find my NBA work at the Analyst, Basketball News, Liberty Ballers, Dime Uproxx, putting out 1 to 2 long form things a week, doing a lot of work. But yeah, if you enjoy Cavs stuff, I'm always on there at least once or twice a week watching the game and tweeting out fun clips about Garland and Mobley and Jarrett. I've been a little tied up with some stuff, but I'm definitely I've heard great things about the Garland game from Saturday and the comeback. So I'll be definitely tuning in there for that sometime later this week when things clear up. But I had someone in my mentions. I was watching the Sixers Heat game, and I had someone in mentions like tweet at me about Garland going off, and I was like, I've made it. The brand is strong. People know to alert me when Darius Garland's having a great game. So I appreciate that. Whoever, can't remember who it was, but thank you if they're listening to this.
Whatever Clutch Sports bot, it's Jeff Siegel's burner. But But as we get out of here, thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Remember, we're free and available on all platforms. Up tomorrow, Evan will be back. We're going to get into Cavs Bulls, a big midweek game, even if it's perhaps not a full strength game for Chicago. I'm in that game because as we're recording this, I don't think we're going to see Lonzo Ball or Zach LaVine in that one. At the very least, we're not going to see Lonzo Ball. If you want a great second listen, check out Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms.